The void whispered in echoes long forgotten, where dying stars bled their last light into the endless abyss. Across the cold expanse of the segmentum obscurus, the embers of once great empires flickered like fading dreams beneath skies stained with cosmic dust. In this twilight of galaxies, where silence held the weight of millennia and the shadows of betrayal loomed over the stars, a story stirred, one of fury, loyalty, and the eternal struggle between man and monster. This was the tale of Leman Russ, the Wolf King, Primarch of the Space Wolves, a saga woven from blood and frost, honor and ruin. But before we step fully into this saga, a moment for you, traveler of the stars, reader of these words, wherever you are watching from, whatever hour marks your world, know this: you are valued, your presence a light against the dark. So take your coffee, steady your breath, and let us begin. In the heart of the Imperium, under the eternal gaze of the Emperor, legends are born and empires forged. Yet even among such grandeur, the rise of a Primarch is no simple tale of glory. It is carved from hardship and betrayal, from the cold fire of ambition and the icy chains of destiny. Leman Russ was no exception. His story began not in the marble halls of terror, but in the savage wilderness of Fenris, a world where the sky raged with storms and the land was a frozen tempest. Fenris was a crucible, its frozen seas shattered beneath tempest winds. Its jagged mountains hid beasts older than memory. The people who survived there were shaped by brutal winters and unending war, their spirits as fierce and untamable as the wolves that prowled the ice fields. Among these hardy souls, a boy was born, marked by the wolf, raised by the wild. Leman Russ was more than a man. He was the storm incarnate. His eyes burned with the cold fire of the Fenrisian frost. His heart beat in sync with the howl of the pack. Yet, beneath the legend, a conflict churned between the savage blood that drove him and the responsibilities that awaited. From the beginning, Russ wrestled with his nature, torn between the brutal freedom of the wild and the iron demands of command. It was the Emperor who found him, drawn by the resonance of power beneath the frozen skies. To the boy raised among wolves, the Emperor offered a vision, a chance to shape the destiny of humanity itself. Yet this gift came burdened with chains, for to lead was to sacrifice, to bind the fury within, and wield it not as a wild beast, but as a king. The Great Crusade was a time of fire and steel, a relentless march to unite the scattered stars beneath the imperial banner. Across countless worlds, the legions of Primarchs brought order and hope, but also the seeds of ruin. For within their hearts lurked ambition and doubt, loyalty and suspicion. The bond between brothers, once unbreakable, began to strain under the weight of secrets and betrayal. Russ stood at the center of this storm, a wolf howling against the dark. His space wolves were fierce, their loyalty absolute, but even their strength could not shield him from the shadows creeping closer. The Imperium demanded unity, but unity was fragile, a thread stretched thin by whispered betrayals and unseen daggers. Beneath the glory of conquest, the Wolf King faced a more personal war, the struggle within his own soul. How does a leader hold fast when the lines between friend and foe blur? When brother becomes betrayer, and trust is a currency too costly to spend? Russ carried these questions like wounds, their pain sharpening his resolve even as it hollowed his heart. As the crusade pushed onward, the stars bore silent witness to a secret festering in the dark, the seeds of heresy that would rend the Imperium apart. The Primarch Horus, once the favored son, now turned to shadow, igniting a rebellion that threatened to devour all. The fires of civil war blazed across the galaxy, and the Wolf King was forced to choose loyalty to a brother or to the ideals that forged their empire. In the cold dawn of betrayal, Fenris itself seemed to echo the turmoil. The frozen winds howled warnings across the ice fields, and the ancient wolves lifted their mournful cries to a dying sun. The Wolf King's path would lead him to war not only against external foes, but within his very bloodline. And yet, beneath the fury and the bloodshed, a question lingered, heavy as the weight of millennia. What price does immortality demand? For Leman Russ was bound not only by flesh, but by fate, a creature of legend cursed to outlive empires and watch as time swallowed all he held dear. The endless march of years was both a gift and a curse, eternal life shadowed by eternal loss. As night falls across the frozen peaks and the stars blink coldly from their distant thrones, the story of the Wolf King begins, not with triumph, but with the fragile hope of survival, a tale of brothers torn apart, of loyalty tested in the fire of war, and of a legacy carved in ice and blood. For this is the world where the howl never dies, and the wolf waits, always waiting, for the dawn. The howl of Fenris's wolves echoed beneath a sky torn with thunder, their mournful cries cutting through the frozen night like knives. In the heart of this savage world, where frost and fury were the law of the land, Leman Russ stood alone atop the jagged cliffs that overlooked the endless ice plains. The wind whipped his cloak into a storm of shadows, but his gaze was steady, burning with a quiet fire. The war to unify humanity was far from over, but the war within himself raged even fiercer. The Space Wolves were more than warriors. They were brothers, bound by blood and honor, tempered in the crucible of Fenrisian hardship. Yet even among the fiercest, cracks had begun to appear. Loyalty, once unshakable, wavered like thin ice over dark water. Russ, their Primarch, bore the weight of these fractures like a blade at his back, the sting of distrust cutting, deeper than any enemy's spear. His closest lieutenant, Logan Grimnar, had always been a stalwart of unwavering loyalty. Yet even Logan's counsel felt strained under the shadow of impending doom. "Wolf Lord," Logan had said just days before, his voice rough but steady like the frozen ground beneath their feet. "The pack feels the tremors. We stand strong now, but for how long before the ice cracks beneath us?" Russ had looked into Logan's eyes and seen the truth he tried to hide. The Wolf King's own heart echoed the fear that even their brotherhood might not withstand the coming storm. For the civil war that brewed across the stars was no distant threat. It clawed at their gates like a beast starving for blood. But beneath these fears, Russ fought a deeper, darker battle, a gnawing question of identity and purpose. He was born of the wilds, fierce and untamed, yet called to lead an empire that demanded order and sacrifice. Could he reconcile the savage with the sovereign? Could a wolf ever truly serve the pack without losing itself? This inner conflict was made sharper by the arrival of a shadow from the past. On the warship Fenrir's Claw, a messenger from Terra arrived bearing tidings wrapped in silence and suspicion. The Emperor's voice was cold through the Vox, speaking of Horus's rebellion, not just a betrayal of brotherhood, but a heresy that threatened to consume the Imperium whole. Russ clenched his fists beneath his fur-lined gauntlets. Horus, once the favored son, now turned traitor. The revelation shattered something deep inside him, a fracture not easily mended. How could the Great Crusade, the dream of unity and peace unravel in the hands of one who had once stood beside him as a brother. Yet, even as the weight of this betrayal pressed down, Russ could not afford weakness. His people needed strength, a beacon in the gathering storm. But strength came at a price, the suppression of doubt, the denial of pain. Every moment spent questioning was a moment the pack grew vulnerable. The Wolf King's mind wandered to his upbringing on Fenris, the bitter cold, the endless hunts, the endless struggle for survival. The wolves had taught him to endure, to strike swiftly and without hesitation. Yet this war was unlike any beast he had faced. It was a war of shadows and secrets, where betrayal came not from claw and fang, but from whispered lies and broken oaths. In the halls of Fenrir, the space wolves gathered, their armor gleaming beneath the cold light of distant stars. Among them was Jarl Ulrich, a fierce warrior whose loyalty to Russ was rivaled only by his ambition. Ulrich's eyes burned with a fire that sometimes bordered on recklessness, a flame Russ both admired and feared. For in Ulrich's zeal lay the risk of blind fury, an edge that could cut both friend and foe alike. "Layman," Ulrich said quietly as they stood before the star maps, "Horus's treachery cannot go unanswered. The Imperium demands retribution, and we will deliver it. The wolves will tear through the traitors like a winter storm." Russ studied Ulrich's fierce expression. The young wolf's spirit was unbreakable, but his heart was raw, too eager for vengeance. The Wolf King knew that fury alone could not win this war. There had to be wisdom beneath the teeth and claws. "Ulrich," Russ said, voice low but commanding, "our fury is our strength, but it must be tempered with purpose. We fight not for hate, but for the future of mankind. Let us be wolves, not beasts." Even as he spoke, a shadow loomed larger, a creeping unease that the battles ahead would demand more than strength and steel. The cost of war was rising, measured in blood and broken bonds. And beyond the battlefield, darker forces stirred in the warp, their whispers seeping into dreams and waking minds alike. Among the space wolves, tales were whispered of the Catan, the ancient sword forged in the fires of forgotten stars, said to grant its bearer immortality at a terrible price. Some believed Russ himself bore its curse, the endless years weighing on his soul like a chain. To live beyond the span of mortals was a gift none truly desired, for immortality was a loneliness deeper than any void. Russ often found himself staring into the dark beyond his chamber windows, contemplating the cost of his fate. To see empires rise and fall, to watch brothers become enemies, to bear the scars of millennia. This was a burden heavier than any armor. And yet, amidst the turmoil, moments of quiet clarity pierced the storm. Memories of Fenris, the howl of the wolves under the blood moon, the warmth of pack and hearth, reminded him of what was worth fighting for. Not just the cold edicts of empire, but the beating heart of loyalty, of family forged in fire and ice. But destiny offered no respite. Orders came swiftly from Terra. The space wolves were to march to the Eye of Terror, to face the legions of chaos and stem the tide of darkness threatening to swallow the Imperium whole. It was a mission fraught with peril, and the Wolf King knew it might be a march to oblivion. As the banners of the space wolves were raised and the engines of Fenrir roared to life, Russ allowed himself a brief, bitter smile. The war would test every bond, every loyalty, every shred of honor. And at the end, only the fiercest would survive. In the cold void, where stars die and empires crumble, the wolf waits, not for glory, but for the reckoning to come. The darkened skies above Fenris mirrored the turmoil that churned within the heart of Leman Russ. The frozen world below, vast and unyielding, had long been a crucible that forged warriors unbreakable as ice and sharp as shattered glaciers. Yet, no forge of frost could temper the growing storm within the Wolf King's soul. The tides of war advanced relentlessly, but it was the battles within, those of trust, loyalty, and betrayal, that threatened to undo him most. As Fenrir's claw cut through the void toward the Eye of Terror, the weight of command settled heavily upon Russ's broad shoulders. His brothers in the legions looked to him not just for strength, but for guidance in a galaxy unraveling. Yet, beneath the veneer of the eternal warrior, doubt gnawed. Could the wolf truly lead the pack through the darkness without becoming the very monster they sought to destroy? Among the crew, whispers carried through the corridors like ghosts. Rumors of secret councils, veiled machinations, and the slow decay of unity among the Primarchs. Some spoke in hushed tones of Horus's betrayal, not merely as treason, but as a fracture in the very soul of the Imperium. Others feared the looming threat of chaos itself, a corruption older than the stars, seeking to rend the fabric of reality. Russ had little time for such whispers. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the maelstrom of the eye churned, a swirling vortex of warp energy, raw and unpredictable. It was here that the true test awaited. His warriors prepared with grim resolve, yet the Wolf King understood that no amount of steel or firepower could shield them from the horrors that lurked beyond the veil of reality. In the quiet moments before battle, Russ sought counsel from an unexpected source, the ancient Fenrisian mystic known only as Hakon, whose knowledge of the warp was as deep and twisted as the eye itself. Hakon's cryptic warning spoke of shadows within shadows, of alliances forged in darkness, and of a fate that might bind even the fiercest of wolves in chains unseen. "Wolf King," Hakon rasped, his voice like the wind through dead trees. "The war you face is not of blades alone. It is a war of souls, where trust is the rarest currency. Beware those who smile with daggers hidden, for even brothers may turn to wolves in the night." Russ's eyes narrowed, the flicker of unease kindling anew. The wolf had always known the wilderness demanded vigilance, but now the wilderness was not just Fenris. It was the very Imperium itself, teetering on the edge of collapse. The days leading to the confrontation were heavy with preparation. The space wolves drilled beneath the cold stars, their howls piercing the silence, a fierce chorus that defied the encroaching darkness. Yet even among them, fissures appeared. Some questioned Russ's decisions. Others doubted the possibility of victory against forces that defied comprehension. One night, beneath a blood-red moon, that Fenrisian legend called the Wolf's Eye, Russ sat alone in his chamber, the weight of millennia pressing down upon him. His thoughts drifted to his brothers, those who had stood beside him and those who had turned away. Horus's betrayal was a wound not easily healed, but deeper still was the knowledge that the Imperium's foundation was cracking, and he must be the shield against its shattering. His hand rested on the hilt of his ancient blade, the Khatan, its edges humming with a cold energy that was as much curse as blessing. The sword's immortality was a tether to the past, a reminder of battles long fought and sacrifices made. To wield it was to carry the loneliness of endless years, the knowledge that time would outlast all but the few cursed to live beyond death. The memories came unbidden. The hunting packs of Fenris, the faces of fallen warriors, the laughter of children lost to war's unrelenting march. Immortality was a gift with a sharpened edge, one that cut deeper than any enemy's blade. To watch the world turn while those you love fade into dust was a torment few could bear. The silence was broken by a sudden knock at the door. It was Ulrich, his face set with a grim determination. "Wolf King," he said, voice low, "there are questions among the pack. Some fear we chase ghosts into the eye. They wonder if this crusade will be our last." Russ met Ulrich's gaze, seeing both the fire of loyalty and the shadow of doubt. "Fear is the breath of the weak," Russ replied. "We do not hunt ghosts, we hunt monsters, and if we fall as wolves, fierce, unyielding, and remembered." Ulrich nodded, though the flicker of uncertainty lingered. Even the fiercest hearts were not immune to the cold whispers of fear. As the fleet approached the eye, the warp's chaotic energies seemed to seep into every corner of the ship. The crew's dreams were haunted by visions, twisted landscapes, faces of old friends turned enemies, and shadows that moved with a life of their own. The war was not merely physical. It was an assault on the mind and soul. In this crucible, alliances were tested. Within the council chambers, Russ found himself facing more than external threats. Old rivalries surfaced, secrets threatened to unravel, and the true nature of loyalty was called into question. Whispers of betrayal whispered from the dark corners, and Russ knew that the greatest danger might not be the enemy without, but the traitor within. One night, a trusted captain, silent and watchful, approached Russ with troubling news. "Wolf King," he said, voice barely a whisper, "there are movements in the shadows, whispers of those who would see the space wolves broken, our strength turned against us. Be wary of those who wear the mask of friend." The weight of the warning settled like frost on Russ's shoulders. The path ahead was shrouded in treachery as much as in war. And so, as Fenrir's claw plunged into the heart of the eye, Leman Russ braced himself for the trials to come. Not just the battles against twisted horrors of the warp, but the deeper war waged in silence among allies and brothers. The wolf must remain vigilant, for even a pack can be undone by a single tooth turned inward. In the swirling chaos of stars and shadows, the Wolf King's journey was far from over. The line between hunter and hunted blurred, and the fate of the Imperium trembled on the edge of a blade. The Eye of Terror was a storm unlike any other, a swirling vortex where reality bent and broke beneath the weight of the warp's fury. Stars twisted into grotesque spirals, and the void screamed with voices lost to madness. Fenrir's claw slipped through this maelstrom, its ancient hull creaking under the strain of energies no mortal mind was meant to comprehend. Inside, the space wolves readied themselves, their hearts steeled against the horrors to come. Yet none could shake the gnawing sense that the greatest battle was not just against chaos, but against the creeping rot within their own ranks. Leman Russ stood at the prow, eyes like frozen flames scanning the shifting tempest ahead. The bitter wind of Fenris was gone, replaced by an unnatural cold that seeped into bone and spirit alike. Around him, his brothers moved with practiced grace, but even the fiercest wolves could not hide the shadow that stretched across their souls. Horus's betrayal was a wound that festered beneath the surface, a betrayal not only of brotherhood, but of the very ideals that had forged the Imperium. The rebellion was no mere fracture. It was a breaking of the great chain that bound the Emperor's sons. Russ's mind replayed the moments when Horus, once a beacon of hope, had turned away, swallowed by darkness. How could a brother become an enemy? The question haunted every step, every command. In the War Council, Russ faced his most trusted advisors. Among them was Bjorn the Fell-Handed, ancient and indomitable, a living relic of battles long past. Bjorn's mechanical limbs glinted beneath his wolf pelts, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder. The traitors gather within the eye, their forces twisted by chaos. We must strike hard, strike fast, and hold the line. Yet even Bjorn's fierce certainty could not dispel the unease that gripped Russ. The Wolf King was no stranger to war, but this was a conflict that clawed at his very soul. His thoughts returned to the Khatan, the ancient blade he carried, the weight of immortality pressing like a chain upon his spirit. The sword was a paradox, a gift that prolonged his life but cursed him with endless loss. He had watched brothers fall, empires rise and shatter, and through it all, he endured, alone. The Space Wolves' descent into the Eye was met with horrors beyond imagining. Demons clawed at reality, their forms shifting and writhing in the sickening glow of the warp. The air itself seemed alive, a suffocating miasma of corruption. Yet Russ stood unflinching, rallying his warriors with the primal fury of Fenris, his battle cry a howl that cut through the cacophony. Amid the chaos, an unexpected betrayal struck. One of Russ's captains, a man sworn to loyalty, revealed himself a servant of chaos. The revelation shattered the fragile trust within the pack, turning brother against brother in a tempest of rage and sorrow. The betrayal was a knife in the heart of the Wolf King, a reminder that the enemy was as much within as without. As the battle raged, Russ faced not only the demonic legions, but the corrosive doubt that threatened to unravel the Space Wolves from inside. The wolf was a creature of pack and honor, yet honor was fragile when trust was broken. Each decision weighed heavy. How to punish betrayal without tearing the pack apart. How to lead when the very foundation trembled. In quiet moments between clashes, Russ sought the counsel of Haakon once more. The ancient mystic's eyes gleamed with a knowing sorrow. "Wolf King," he whispered, "the path you walk is narrow, edged with shadows. You must choose, hold the pack together, or let the wild fury consume all." The Wolf King's heart ached with the choice. The fury that defined him was also his greatest risk. To deny it was to betray himself. To embrace it without restraint could doom them all. The war within mirrored the war without. As battles tore through the shifting landscape of the Eye, the Space Wolves fought with savage tenacity, but at great cost. The loss of trusted warriors carved wounds deeper than any blade. Russ bore the burden silently, the weight of command a heavy crown, and through it all, the question lingered. What was the cost of loyalty? Was the price too high when brotherhood was stained with betrayal and honor demanded sacrifice? The Wolf King's resolve hardened, yet beneath the ice lay a fragile hope that even in darkness the pack could endure. As Fenrir's claw emerged battered but unbroken from the Eye, Russ gazed into the distant stars, their cold light a reminder of what was at stake. The war was far from over, and the shadows that haunted the Imperium would not rest. But the wolf's howl rose once more, a promise that as long as he lived, the pack would fight. Yet even as the stars burned bright, a deeper shadow crept closer, the shadow of time itself. Immortality was no gift, it was a prison. Russ, the Wolf King, was bound to watch the ages pass, to see empires crumble and be forgotten. The loneliness of endless years was a blade sharper than any enemy's fang. In the silence that followed the storm, Russ vowed to face the coming trials with the fierce heart of Fenris. For the wolf must always hunt, must always fight, until the final howl fades into the void. The stillness that followed the storm was deceptive. A fragile silence stretched thin over the scars of battle. Fenrir's claw drifted through the void like a wounded beast, its hull scarred, but unyielding. Within its ancient walls, the space wolves tended to their fallen and tended to wounds that ran deeper than flesh. The wounds of war were not only those carved by enemy blades, but those etched into the heart by betrayal and doubt. Leman Russ sat alone in the dim glow of the command chamber, the weight of command pressing upon him like the crushing cold of Fenris's ice fields. His gaze lingered on the stars beyond the viewport, distant pinpricks of light that seemed so small, so fragile against the endless darkness. The galaxy was vast, and yet his world had shrunk to this moment, a crucible of choices that would shape the fate of many. His thoughts circled again and again to the traitor captain, the one who had turned his blade against the pack. The sting of betrayal was a poison that spread swiftly, infecting trust and breeding suspicion. How could one break the unbreakable bond of brotherhood? How could the wolf's howl be silenced from within? But even as the pain of treachery lingered, Russ knew that the struggle was not merely against external foes or traitorous kin. It was a war for the soul of the space wolves themselves. Loyalty was a flame that flickered dangerously in the wind of doubt, and Russ was both its keeper and its prisoner. The Primarch's inner conflict deepened as he confronted the realities of immortality. The C'tan at his side was both a blessing and a curse, a relic that bound him to endless years, forcing him to watch the ages turn while those he loved withered and passed into memory. The loneliness of eternal life gnawed at him, an unspoken torment beneath his fierce exterior. In the council chambers, voices rose in heated debate. Some urged swift vengeance against the traitors, demanding blood and retribution to purge the pack's stain. Others counseled caution, warning that rash fury would only deepen divisions and hasten ruin. Russ listened, the storm within him mirroring the storm without. The path of leadership was a knife edge. One wrong step and all could fall into chaos. His fury was legendary, but now it was tempered by a growing wisdom born of loss and time. Among those gathered was Ragnar Blackmane, a warrior of fiery spirit and unyielding loyalty, whose youthful zeal both inspired and challenged Russ. Ragnar's voice cut through the council, a call to action wrapped in defiance. "We are wolves, not lambs. Let the traitors know the fury of Fenris. We will hunt them down and tear them limb from limb." Russ met Ragnar's gaze, seeing in the young wolf the spark of hope and the fire of recklessness. "Fury without purpose is the path to ruin," Russ replied. "We fight not for vengeance, but for the survival of the pack. We must be wolves, yes, but wolves with cunning and honor." The debate was a mirror of the internal war that plagued Russ's soul, a war between savage instinct and the burdens of command. The Wolf King knew that the fate of his legion, and perhaps the Imperium itself, hinged on his ability to navigate this precarious balance. Meanwhile, reports from the frontier grew darker. The forces of chaos pressed harder, their twisted legions spreading corruption like a cancer. Worlds once vibrant now lay twisted in shadow, their populations lost to madness and despair. The great crusade to reunite humanity faltered beneath the weight of rebellion and decay. Russ's mind returned to the Emperor, a figure both distant and near, a father, a god, and a symbol of an impossible ideal. The Emperor's vision of unity and peace had driven the Primarchs to conquer the stars, yet now that vision seemed fractured, threatened by the very sons who had once sworn loyalty. In rare moments of solitude, Russ sought the counsel of Hakon, the mystic whose eyes saw beyond the veil of the present. Hakon's words were cryptic, but filled with grave warning. "The wolf's path is one of sacrifice," he said softly. "To protect the pack, You must sometimes walk through shadow. The choices you make will echo through eternity. These words weighed heavily on Russ's heart. Sacrifice was the currency of leadership, but the cost was often unbearable. To save the many, the few might be lost: brothers, friends, family. As the fleet prepared to move once more, Russ's thoughts turned to his warriors, the sons of Fenris, who looked to him for strength and guidance. Their loyalty was fierce, their spirits unbroken, but even the strongest pack could fracture under pressure. He found solace in the presence of his wolf guard, those closest to him, bound not just by duty, but by a bond deeper than blood. Among them, Ulrich remained a figure of unyielding faith and fierce passion, a reminder that even in darkness, the flame of loyalty could burn bright. Yet, Russ could not escape the shadow of doubt that clung to his soul like a second skin. The price of immortality was solitude, and the longer he lived, the more he understood that even kings must fall and empires crumble. As Fenrir's claw set course for the next battlefront, the Wolf King steeled himself for the trials ahead. The war was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. Yet beneath the fury and the bloodshed lay a fragile hope that through sacrifice and honor, the pack might endure the coming storm. For in the end, it was not the strength of claws or the sharpness of teeth that would determine their fate, but the unbreakable spirit of the wolf. The void beyond Fenrir's claw was a dark sea, endless and indifferent. Stars burned coldly, distant and untouched by the turmoil that gripped the space wolves aboard the ancient warship. Within its steel hull, the echoes of past battles reverberated, a constant reminder that history was not kind to those who sought to command fate itself. Leman Russ stood at the edge of the command deck, eyes shadowed by the weight of centuries and the burden of inevitable sacrifice. The Wolf King was a figure of legend, but legend did not shield him from the cracks growing within his soul. His heart, once aflame with youthful fury and unyielding pride, now bore the scars of countless losses. Each victory came tethered to a price, and each choice carved deeper into the fabric of his being. Around him, the space wolves prepared for the battles ahead. The men and warriors of Fenris were fierce beyond measure, their loyalty as fierce as the biting winds of their home world. Yet beneath the surface of their unwavering dedication, doubt stirred, an undercurrent that Russ sensed but could not yet name. The war against the traitorous legions of Horus had fractured the Imperium in ways that went far beyond open battle. The lines between friend and foe blurred in shadows, and trust became a currency too costly to spend freely. Russ's mind returned often to that bitter truth. In war, the greatest danger sometimes lurked not in the enemy's spear, but in the silence of a brother's glance. The space between stars was filled with whispers, whispers of conspiracy, hidden alliances, and secret fears. The once unified crusade was crumbling under the weight of its own ambitions and betrayals. Even as Russ rallied his warriors, he knew that survival demanded more than muscle and steel. It demanded wisdom, sacrifice, and a ruthless heart. In one rare moment of respite, Russ sought the presence of Hakon, the ancient mystic who had long guided him through the shadows of uncertainty. The old man's eyes were like cracked ice, reflecting both the wisdom of ages and the sorrow of countless losses. "The wolf's path grows darker," Hakon said, voice low and grave. "The storm approaches, and with it, the temptation of the abyss. To protect the pack, you must walk close to the edge, Leman. Beware the cost." Russ nodded, the words sinking deep into his soul. He was no stranger to sacrifice, but the price always seemed to rise with each passing year. The pack depended on him, yet he was increasingly aware that even kings must bleed, and sometimes fall. Meanwhile, tensions within the Space Wolves simmered beneath the surface. Among the ranks, voices questioned Russ's leadership, not out of disloyalty, but from fear and frustration. The prolonged war, the mounting losses, and the ever-present shadow of chaos wore heavily on even the fiercest hearts. Ulrich, ever the fiery spirit, remained a beacon of unyielding faith in Russ's cause, yet even he could not mask the strain. The pack must stay united, Ulrich urged during one council meeting, his voice ringing with conviction. We cannot afford cracks, not now. The wolf's strength lies in its unity. But unity was fragile, a delicate balance between order and savagery. Russ understood that his greatest challenge was not merely defeating the traitors or the demonic hordes, but preserving the soul of the Space Wolves themselves. As the fleet neared a strategic system held by the forces of chaos, Russ prepared for a confrontation that would test both his leadership and his resolve. The battle would be brutal, a maelstrom of fire and fury, where survival hinged on trust and sacrifice. The clash was fierce, the air thick with the stench of burning promethium and the cries of the dying. Russ fought at the forefront, his every strike a tempest of wrath honed by centuries of war. Yet amidst the carnage, he could feel the fragile threads of loyalty fraying, threatened by the endless toll of blood and death. After the battle, as silence fell over the shattered moonscape, Russ surveyed the cost. Warriors who had stood as brothers lay broken, and the Wolf King's heart ached with the weight of their sacrifice. Immortality demanded endless mourning, a cycle of loss that threatened to consume what little hope remained. In the quiet moments, Russ reflected on the paradox that defined him. The C'tan was both a blessing and a curse, binding him to life beyond measure, yet condemning him to watch all he loved crumble into dust. The price of eternal life was eternal solitude, and yet, amidst the darkness, a flicker of defiant hope burned. The Wolf King knew that his purpose was not merely survival, but the forging of a legacy, a pack that could endure the coming storm, no matter the cost. As Fenrir's claw set course once more into the maelstrom, Russ's resolve hardened like frozen steel. The war was far from over, and the shadows of betrayal and loss stretched long across the stars. But the wolf's howl would never be silenced. For as long as he lived, Leman Russ would fight, not just for the Imperium, but for the soul of the pack. The skies above the war-ravaged system churned with storm clouds, as if the heavens themselves rebelled against the carnage below. The shattered remnants of once proud worlds drifted in orbit, silent witnesses to the relentless tide of war that swept through the galaxy. Fenrir's claw hung in the void, its battered hull scarred by countless battles, bearing the weight of an empire's hopes and curses alike. Leman Russ stood on the bridge, the weight of his centuries-old burden pressing down like a suffocating frost. His eyes, cold and piercing, traced the outlines of the shattered moonscape beneath, the battleground where destiny would again be forged in blood and fire. But the battle without was only a mirror to the war within, a tempest of doubt, betrayal, and fractured loyalties that gnawed at his soul. The Space Wolves were battered but unbroken, yet whispers of dissent stirred among the ranks. The relentless attrition of war wore on the spirits of even the fiercest warriors. Some questioned Russ's decisions, others feared that the pack might fracture under the strain of endless conflict and the shadow of Horus's rebellion. Among the Wolf King's closest confidants, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Jarl Ulrich, whose fiery zeal had long been a pillar of strength, now spoke with a sharper edge, a reminder that passion could become recklessness if left unchecked. "Layman," Ulrich said, his voice low but urgent, "we stand at the edge of a precipice. The enemy within grows bolder. If we do not strike swiftly and decisively, the pack will be torn apart from within." Russ regarded Ulrich, sensing the wolf's fire, yet wary of the dangers it posed. The line between leadership and tyranny was thin, and Ulrich's fervor threatened to tip the balance. "Ulrich," Russ replied, voice steady, yet heavy with meaning. "Strength is not measured by the sharpness of the blade alone. Wisdom must guide our fury. We fight to preserve the pack, not to scatter it to the winds." Yet, even as Russ spoke, the threads of betrayal tightened their grip. A secret faction within the Space Wolves conspired, their motives tangled between loyalty and ambition, fear and desperation. Russ's instincts warned him that the greatest threat was not the enemy's sword, but the whisper in the dark. The battles fought in the void were brutal, a cacophony of fire and steel, where the clash of titans echoed through the silence of space. The traitor legions, twisted by the corrupting touch of chaos, fought with a ferocity born of madness and hate. The Space Wolves answered with equal fury, their howls a savage counterpoint to the demonic shrieks. Yet, in the heart of the conflict, Russ's gaze was drawn inward. Each victory was a Pyrrhic triumph, stained by loss and the erosion of trust. The faces of fallen brothers haunted his dreams, their memories both a balm and a torment. In the midst of this turmoil, Russ found an unlikely ally in Bjorn the Fell-Handed, whose ancient wisdom was a beacon amid the storm. Bjorn's voice, though weary, carried the weight of ages. The pack must hold Layman. Only through unity can we withstand the darkness. But unity required more than words. It demanded sacrifice, the severing of ties to the past, the embracing of harsh truths. Russ grappled with the knowledge that some sacrifices would come from within the pack itself. One night, beneath the fractured light of a dying star, Russ confronted the truth that had long lurked in the shadows. A trusted commander, sworn to loyalty, was revealed to be a servant of chaos, his betrayal a knife twisted deep into the heart of the Wolf King's domain. The revelation shattered the fragile trust that had sustained the pack. Russ's fury was fierce, but tempered by sorrow. The Wolf King understood that punishment alone would not heal the wound. It would take wisdom and mercy to hold the pack together. The emotional toll was immense. Russ, immortal yet burdened by the passage of centuries, felt the sting of loneliness sharpen. The curse of eternal life was not power, but an endless parade of loss, the fading of friends, the crumbling of empires, the quiet extinction of hope. In the quiet moments after the battle, Russ found himself drawn to the ancient halls where the legends of Fenris echoed. There, amidst the echoes of the past, he sought solace in memories of home. The howl of wolves beneath the blood moon, the warmth of the pack's fire, the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of survival. Yet, even in the heart of Fenrisian memory, shadows lingered. The Wolf King knew that the path forward was fraught with peril, not just from the enemy without, but from the fractures within. The question that haunted Russ was simple, yet profound. How does one lead a pack when the lines between friend and foe blur? How does a king rule when loyalty is a fragile flame, flickering in the winds of betrayal? As the storm of war raged on, Russ prepared for the battles yet to come. The fate of the Imperium, and perhaps the galaxy itself, hung in the balance. The wolf's howl would echo through the void, a promise that the pack would endure, even as the stars themselves faded. The void around Fenrir's claw was thick with the stench of ozone and burnt promethium, a tangible reminder of the violence that had become the constant rhythm of the Space Wolves' crusade. The war-ravaged system beneath them lay scarred, a testament to the unyielding fury of battle and the relentless advance of chaos. Yet the battle raging outside the ship was but a reflection of the greater war tearing at the heart of the pack. Leman Russ stood silent on the bridge, the weight of immortality pressing heavily upon his shoulders. Centuries of combat had carved deep lines into his soul, and every victory bore the bitter taste of loss. His eyes scanned the shifting stars beyond, their cold light a distant echo of the promises once made by the Emperor. Those promises had fractured, and the galaxy now spiraled toward ruin. The Wolf King's thoughts were troubled not just by the external threat, but by the shadows that lurked within his own ranks. Trust was a fragile thing, shattered by whispers and betrayal. The secret faction still simmered beneath the surface, its motives hidden behind masks of loyalty. Russ knew the danger all too well. The greatest enemy was often the one who called himself brother. Among the Space Wolves, tensions mounted. Ulrich's fiery zeal pushed for ruthless justice, his voice a clarion call to purge the pack's enemies without hesitation. Yet others counseled caution, fearing that unchecked wrath would only hasten their downfall. The debate was fierce, a battle of ideologies as deadly as any fought with bolter or blade. Russ found himself torn between these extremes. His heart beat with the ferocity of Fenris, yet his mind sought the wisdom to temper that fury with prudence. The Wolf King understood that leadership was a path fraught with impossible choices, where every decision carved new scars. The battle for the system's final world was looming, a brutal crucible where fate would be decided. The enemy entrenched themselves in twisted fortresses, their forces bolstered by dark sorcery and corrupted war engines. The Space Wolves prepared to unleash their fury, but Russ knew that brute strength alone would not secure victory. In quiet moments, Russ sought counsel once more from Hakon. The mystic's gaze was heavy with sorrow and foreknowledge. The wolves must become more than warriors, Hakon said softly. They must become hunters of shadows, guardians of a truth buried deep in the dark. Russ pondered these words, aware that the path forward required more than steel and fire. It demanded insight into the unseen, the unraveling of secrets that might save or doom them all. As the assault began, the battle erupted into a symphony of chaos and valor. The Space Wolves howled their battle cries, cutting through the night like blades of frost. Russ fought at the forefront, his katana flashing with cold precision, each strike a message to the darkness that they would not yield. Yet amidst the fury, Russ sensed the growing weight of doubt, not just in himself, but in those he led. The Wolf King's immortal gaze caught moments of hesitation, glimmers of fear behind the bravest faces. The prolonged conflict was eroding the spirit, threatening to break the pack from within. After the fighting subsided, the cost was laid bare. Fallen brothers were mourned, their names whispered in solemn reverence. The price of survival was steep, and Russ's heart ached with the familiar sting of loss. But there was no time for grief. The web of betrayal tightened, and Russ knew that the pack's unity was the only shield against the encroaching darkness. He resolved to root out the traitors, to confront the shadow within before it consumed them all. The Wolf King called a secret gathering of his most trusted, Ulrich, Bjorn, Ragnar, and a select few who had proven their loyalty in the crucible of war. In the shadowed council chamber, Russ's voice was low but resolute. "The wolves face enemies on all sides," he said. "Not only the legions of chaos, but those who would see us broken from within. We stand at a crossroads. Trust must be earned and betrayal punished. We will hunt the shadows and tear them from our midst." Ulrich's eyes burned with fervor. "Let them come. The wolf's vengeance will be swift and unforgiving." Ragnar's youthful passion was tempered by a cautious nod. "We fight not just for ourselves, but for Fenris, for the pack." Bjorn's voice was a rumble of ancient strength. "We are the wolf's fury incarnate. We endure because we must." Together, they forged a silent pact, to stand united against the rising storm, to confront not only the enemy without, but the darkness that threatened from within. As Fenrir's claw prepared to strike again, Russ felt the full weight of his burden. Immortality was a curse that stretched endlessly before him, a path lined with sacrifice and sorrow. Yet he remained steadfast, a wolf who would hunt until his last breath, guarding the fragile hope of a pack that might one day reclaim its place among the stars. The war was far from over, and the Wolf King knew the coming days would test not only his strength, but the very soul of the Space Wolves. But as long as his heart beat, the howl of Fenris would echo through the void, a defiant cry against the encroaching night. The void beyond the shattered world was a swirling tempest of chaos and shadow, the very fabric of reality torn asunder by the ceaseless war that raged across the galaxy. Fenrir's claw hovered in the abyss, battered but unyielding, a symbol of defiance against the encroaching darkness. Within its steel bones, the Space Wolves prepared for a reckoning, a confrontation that would shape the fate of their pack and perhaps the Imperium itself. Leman Russ stood in the heart of the warship, his gaze distant yet fierce, haunted by the ghosts of countless battles. The weight of immortality bore down upon him like an unrelenting winter storm. Time stretched endlessly before him, a relentless tide that carried both hope and despair. The Wolf King had seen empires rise and crumble, friends fall to treachery, and the galaxy consumed by fire. Yet through it all, he endured, an eternal sentinel on the brink of oblivion. The Wolf King's mind was a battlefield as much as the void outside. The internal strife that plagued the Space Wolves festered, its poison threatening to unravel the bonds forged in blood and honor. The traitorous faction within the pack moved like shadows, striking at trust and sowing discord with whispered lies. Russ's heart was heavy with the knowledge that war was not only fought with bolter and blade, but with betrayal and silence. Council chambers, once filled with brotherly counsel, now echoed with suspicion and veiled threats. Ulrich's fervent calls for ruthless purging clashed with Bjorn's tempered wisdom and Ragnar's impassioned pleas for unity. The pack was torn between fury and prudence, and Russ bore the impossible burden of guiding them through the storm. In a rare moment of reflection, Russ sought the solace of the ancient relic chamber where the Catan rested, its blade cold and unyielding, a symbol of his immortality and eternal curse. The sword whispered of power and sacrifice, its weight a constant reminder that his fate was bound to endless struggle. The impending battle was more than a clash of armies. It was a test of the Wolf King's resolve and the pack's cohesion. The enemy had entrenched themselves in a fortress of dark sorcery, their defenses bolstered by twisted war machines and demonic legions. The coming assault would be a crucible, one that could forge or shatter the Space Wolves forever. As the battle dawned, the heavens wept ash and fire. Fenrir's claw descended into the heart of the storm, unleashing its fury upon the enemy. Russ led the charge, his presence a beacon of primal wrath and unyielding will. His Khatan sang through the air, each strike a testament to centuries of honed skill and indomitable spirit. Yet amidst the chaos, Russ sensed the fragile threads of trust fraying. The whispers of betrayal grew louder, and the Wolf King's eyes searched for the traitor who threatened to undo them all. The enemy was not only the demonic hordes, but the darkness within the pack. The battle was a tempest of violence, the air thick with the cries of the fallen and the clash of titanic forces. Warriors fought with savage determination, each step a struggle against despair and the lure of corruption. The Wolf King's fury was a storm that swept across the battlefield, but even his wrath could not quell the growing unrest. After the smoke cleared and silence fell, Russ faced the grim reality. The cost was staggering. Brothers lost, trust shattered, and the shadow of doubt deepened. The Wolf King's heart was a tumult of grief and resolve. The battle had been won, but the war for the soul of the pack raged fiercer than ever. In the aftermath, Russ convened his inner circle, their faces etched with fatigue and resolve. The pack must stand united, he declared, voice heavy but unwavering. The enemy seeks to divide us. We will root out the shadows and bind the wounds, or we will fall. Ulrich's fierce gaze met Russ's, unyielding. Let them come. The wolf's vengeance will be swift and merciless. Bjorn's ancient voice carried the weight of ages. We are more than warriors. We are the pack. We endure because we must. Ragnar's youthful spirit burned bright, for Fenris and for the pack. Together, they forged a pact, a bond of loyalty and purpose that transcended doubt and fear. The Wolf King's resolve was reforged in the fires of loss and sacrifice, yet beneath the surface, the shadow remained, an unseen threat that whispered of darker days ahead. Russ knew the path forward was fraught with peril, and that the greatest battles were yet to come. As Fenrir's claw set course once more into the void, the Wolf King's howl echoed through the void, a promise that the pack would endure, that as long as he lived, Fenris's spirit would burn bright. The galaxy was a crucible of war and betrayal, but the Wolf King remained a sentinel, an eternal guardian against the night. The vastness of the void was both a sanctuary and a prison, an endless expanse where time stretched thin and memories grew heavy. Fenrir's claw drifted among shattered remnants of ancient battles, its hull a tapestry of scars that spoke of unyielding defiance. Within its shadowed corridors, the space wolves prepared for the next reckoning, a storm that threatened to consume not only worlds, but the very soul of the pack. Leman Russ stood alone in the command chamber, the weight of centuries pressing on him like the crushing cold of Fenris's glaciers. The Khatan at his side was a constant reminder of his immortality, both a gift and a curse that bound him to endless years of war and loss. The Wolf King's eyes, sharp and haunted, gazed beyond the viewport at the distant stars, silent witnesses to empires rising and falling in the endless night. The pack's unity was fracturing, a slow erosion driven by fear, doubt, and the insidious touch of chaos. The traitorous faction within their ranks grew bolder, their whispers a poison that seeped into the heart of brotherhood. Russ knew that the greatest threat was not the demonic hordes or the traitor legions without, but the darkness festering within. In council, voices clashed like storm winds. Ulrich's fiery calls for ruthless purging met with Bjorn's measured counsel and Ragnar's impassioned pleas for cohesion. The Wolf King stood at the center of the storm, balancing fury and wisdom, the savage and the sovereign. The looming battle was a crucible that would test the very essence of the Space Wolves, The enemy had entrenched themselves within a fortress of sorcery and steel, their forces bolstered by corrupted war machines and demonic entities. Victory would demand not only strength, but sacrifice and cunning. Russ's mind turned inward, wrestling with the paradox of his immortal existence. The price of eternal life was solitude and endless mourning, the loss of brothers and friends, watching as generations faded into memory. The Khatan was both his shield and his shackle, binding him to a fate that offered no respite. As the assault commenced, Fenrir's claw descended into the heart of the enemy's stronghold, unleashing a fury that shook the stars themselves. The Space Wolves howled their battle cries, cutting through darkness with blades and bolter fire. Russ led the charge, his every strike a tempest of wrath and precision, a dance of death honed over centuries. Yet amidst the chaos, Russ felt the fragile threads of trust unravel. The traitors moved like shadows, striking at the pack's heart when vigilance faltered. The Wolf King's eyes burned with rage and sorrow, every betrayal a dagger twisted deep into the soul of Fenris. The battle raged like a storm, the air thick with fire and ash, cries of the fallen mingling with the clash of titans. Warriors fought with desperate valor, each step a struggle against despair and corruption. Russ's fury was a beacon of hope, but even his wrath could not shield the pack from the growing darkness within. When silence finally fell, the cost was revealed. Brothers lost, bonds shattered, and the shadow of doubt deepened. Russ's heart a tumult of grief and determination. The battle was won, but the war for the pack's soul was far from over. In the aftermath, Russ gathered his inner circle, their faces etched with exhaustion and resolve. "The pack must remain unbroken," he declared. "The enemy seeks to divide us. We will root out the shadows and mend the fractures, or we will fall." Ulrich's fierce gaze met his. "Let them come. The wolf's vengeance will be swift and merciless." Bjorn's ancient voice carried the weight of ages. "We are more than warriors. We are the pack. We endure because we must." Ragnar's youthful spirit burned bright, for Fenris and for the pack. Together they forged a bond, a pact of loyalty and purpose that transcended fear and doubt. Russ's resolve was reforged in the fires of sacrifice, yet beneath the surface the shadow remained, an unseen threat whispering of darker days. Russ knew the path forward was fraught with peril, and that the greatest battles were yet to come. As Fenrir's claw set course once more into the void, Russ's howl echoed, a promise that the pack would endure. As long as he lived, Fenris's spirit would burn bright. The galaxy was a crucible of war and betrayal, but Russ remained a sentinel, an eternal guardian against the night. The endless night of space stretched before Fenrir's claw, like a yawning abyss, cold and unfeeling. Within the fortress of steel and fire, the Space Wolves moved with purpose, a pack bound by blood, honor, and an unyielding will to endure. Yet beneath the surface of their steadfast unity, the Wolf King sensed the slow rot of betrayal creeping through the ranks. Leman Russ paced the command chamber, his thoughts a turbulent storm. The immortal king was burdened by centuries of war, the price of his eternal life written in the faces of fallen brothers and broken promises. The Khatan rested heavily at his side, a silent reminder of the relentless march of time and fate. The traitorous faction within the Space Wolves had grown more brazen, their whispered conspiracies twisting trust into suspicion. Russ knew that the pack's survival depended not only on strength in battle, but on the unbreakable bonds of loyalty, bonds now tested to their limits. Ulrich's voice had taken on a sharper edge, his zeal burning hotter with each betrayal uncovered. The wolves must hunt their own shadows, he declared, eyes blazing. Only by purging the rot can we stand against the darkness without. Bjorn, the ancient warrior, counseled restraint. Rage is a flame that can consume both friend and foe. We must be wary lest we destroy the very pack we seek to save. Ragnar, still young but fierce, struggled to reconcile his passion with the cold realities of war. His faith in Russ was unwavering, but even the fiercest spirit could falter under the weight of doubt. The battlefront loomed, a world twisted by chaos, its surface scarred and broken. The Space Wolves prepared for a decisive engagement, knowing that the outcome would shape the fate of their crusade and the very soul of their legion. Russ's heart was heavy with the knowledge that victory might come at a terrible cost. Immortality demanded sacrifice, not only of enemies, but of brothers. The Wolf King wrestled with the torment of leadership, where every decision was a blade that cut deep into his conscience. As the assault began, the skies ignited with fire and fury. The Space Wolves surged forward, their battle cries a savage hymn against the night. Russ fought with the ferocity of Fenris itself, his Khatan a streak of cold death that carved a path through chaos. Yet amidst the carnage, Russ's gaze was drawn to moments of hesitation, flashes of doubt among even his most loyal warriors. The prolonged conflict and the spectre of betrayal weighed heavily on their spirits. After the dust settled, the cost was laid bare. Brothers were lost, the pack wounded not only in body but in spirit. Russ mourned the fallen, their memories a bittersweet solace amid the pain. In the council chambers, the Wolf King faced his inner circle. His voice was steady but laced with sorrow. The pack stands at a crossroads. We must choose our path wisely, for the wrong step will lead to ruin. Ulrich's eyes burned with resolve. The wolves will strike at the rot and root it out. No traitor shall survive. Bjorn's ancient wisdom tempered the fervour. We must be the pack that endures, not the pack that destroys itself. Ragnar's youthful voice rang clear. For Fenris, we fight as one. Together, they renewed their oath, to stand united against the darkness without and the shadows within. The Wolf King's burden was great, but so was his resolve. As Fenrir's claw prepared to plunge once more into the void, Russ's howl echoed through the silent night, a promise of defiance and hope. The war was far from over, but the spirit of Fenris would burn eternal. The void was silent, but for the distant hum of Fenrir's claw's engines, a solemn lull that belied the turmoil within its steel heart. Space around the vessel stretched endless and cold, a cosmic sea indifferent to the fate of empires and warriors alike. Yet within the ship, the fires of the Space Wolves' resolve burned fiercely, even as shadows lengthened and doubt crept like a slow poison. Leman Russ stood alone in the observation chamber, the stars reflected coldly in his ancient eyes. Immortality had granted him vision beyond mortal limits, but it also burdened him with memories too vast, too heavy. He had watched civilizations rise and fall, witnessed friends turn to foes, and felt the relentless march of time gnaw at his soul. The war was no longer just against the traitor legions or the demonic legions that tainted the galaxy. Now it was a war within. The pack itself was fractured, divided by suspicion and the bitter sting of betrayal. The Wolf King knew that the greatest battle was not fought on bloodied fields, but in the hearts of those who called themselves brothers. The council chambers were tense as Russ convened his trusted leaders, Ulrich, Bjorn, Ragnar, and others who had remained steadfast. The air was thick with unspoken fears and guarded words. The pack's unity is our greatest weapon, Russ intoned, his voice a low growl. Without it, we are lost. The enemy seeks to unravel us, to turn brother against brother. We must be vigilant. Ulrich's fiery gaze met Russ's. The rot must be purged, no matter the cost. Bjorn's ancient voice held a grave calm. Swift justice tempered by wisdom will keep the pack whole. Ragnar nodded fiercely. For Fenris and the pack, we stand united. But even as they spoke, Russ felt the weight of decisions that could fracture the pack irrevocably. The line between justice and vengeance blurred dangerously. The Space Wolves prepared for their next engagement, a pivotal battle against forces of chaos, entrenched in a fortress world scarred by war and sorcery. The stakes were immense. The victory could turn the tide of the crusade, but failure meant devastation. Russ led the charge with the fury of a storm, his Catan a flash of frozen death in the swirling chaos. The clash was brutal, a maelstrom of fire, steel, and sorcery where brotherhood was tested and sacrifices were made. Yet amidst the fury, Russ's gaze was drawn inward, to the fragile bonds that held the pack together. Every step forward was shadowed by the threat of betrayal, the uncertainty that lurked behind loyal faces. When the dust settled, the cost was grave. Warriors fell, the pack's wounds deepened not just in body but in spirit. Russ mourned silently, his immortal heart aching with the burden of eternal loss. In the quiet aftermath, Russ sought Hakon's counsel. The mystic's eyes held sorrow and knowledge. The Wolf King walks a path between light and shadow, Hakon said. The pack's fate hinges on choices yet to be made. Russ knew the coming days would demand sacrifices greater than any before. The weight of immortality was a lonely crown, its thorns sharp and unyielding. As Fenrir's claw set course into the darkness once more, Russ's howl echoed, a defiant cry against the encroaching night. The Wolf King's resolve was unbroken, but the path ahead was fraught with peril. The galaxy burned with war and betrayal, and the Wolf King stood as both hunter and guardian, an eternal sentinel in a universe on the brink of collapse. The skies above the shattered world were heavy with ash and storm, as if the heavens mourned the coming reckoning. The remnants of ancient ruins sprawled beneath Fenrir's claw, a silent testament to empires long fallen and battles that had shaped the fate of the galaxy. Here, at the edge of oblivion, the Wolf King prepared for a confrontation that would decide not only the future of his pack, but the very soul of the Imperium. Leman Russ stood upon the command deck, the cold light of distant stars casting long shadows across his battle-worn armor. His eyes, eternal and piercing, held the weight of millennia, an immortal burden carried alone. The Catan hung at his side, its blade a symbol of the relentless war he had waged against both the enemies without and the shadows within. The traitor's web had been unraveled, but at great cost. Brothers once sworn to loyalty had fallen, torn apart by treachery and the cruel hand of fate. The pack was battered, the scars of betrayal raw and bleeding. Russ knew that the final confrontation loomed, a moment when loyalty and betrayal would clash in a storm of blood and fury. Ulrich, fierce and unyielding, stood at Russ's side, his gaze burning with the fire of righteous wrath. "The time has come to strike at the heart of the rot," he said. "No mercy for those who would tear the pack asunder." Bjorn, ancient and weary, offered a tempered voice. Justice must be swift, but not blind. The Wolf King must lead, not only with strength but with wisdom. Ragnar's youthful spirit was tempered by the harsh lessons of war. For Fenris, we fight as one, until the last breath. Together, they prepared to descend upon the traitor's stronghold, a fortress steeped in dark sorcery and guarded by corrupted war machines. The battle would be brutal, a tempest of fire and steel that could either cleanse the pack or shatter it forever. As Fenrir's claw plunged into the storm of battle, Russ's mind was a whirlwind of memories, faces of fallen brothers, echoes of promises broken, the weight of immortality that bore down like a relentless tide. The Catan sang through the chaos, a blade of frozen fury that cut through flesh and shadow alike. Yet amidst the carnage, Russ was confronted by the ultimate betrayal. A brother turned enemy, his eyes hollowed by corruption and despair. The duel was fierce and tragic, a clash not only of blades but of souls. Russ fought not just for victory but for the hope of redemption. The Wolf King's fury was unmatched, but the pain of loss struck deeper than any wound. As the traitor fell, Russ felt the cruel sting of sacrifice. Victory was a Pyrrhic prize, stained with the blood of kin. The battle raged until silence fell like a shroud. The pack was victorious but broken, its bonds reforged in fire and sorrow. Russ stood amidst the ruin, his gaze heavy with the cost of leadership. In the aftermath, Russ called the survivors together. His voice was both a dirge and a promise. We are the wolves of Fenris, bound by blood, honor, and an unyielding will. Our path is stained with sacrifice, but as long as the wolf's howl echoes in the void, we endure. Ulrich's fierce eyes glimmered with unshed tears. The wolf's vengeance is swift and just. Bjorn's ancient voice carried the weight of ages. We are the pack, eternal and unbroken. Ragnar's youthful cry rang through the chamber. For Fenris and the pack. But Russ knew the victory came at a terrible price. The scars of betrayal would never fully heal, and the path ahead was shadowed by uncertainty. Immortality was a lonely throne, and the Wolf King bore its burden with silent strength. As Fenrir's claw set course for the stars once more, Russ's howl echoed, a haunting promise that the spirit of Fenris would never fade, even as empires crumbled and stars died. The war was far from over, but the Wolf King's resolve burned brighter than ever, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. The void around Fenrir's claw churned with the remnants of starfire, the remnants of countless battles painting the darkness with streaks of light and shadow. The warship, battered yet unbroken, sailed into the heart of a maelstrom that threatened to swallow not just the pack, but the very essence of Fenris itself. Leman Russ stood upon the command deck, his armor scarred and worn, a testament to the unending wars waged across the stars. His eyes, ageless and fierce, held the haunted memories of millennia, the endless cycle of battle, loss, and sacrifice that shaped the Wolf King's eternal existence. The Catan at his side was both a weapon and a reminder of power and of the cruel cost of immortality. The Wolf King's mind wrestled with the weight of impending decisions, the thin line between salvation and destruction. The pack was fractured but unyielding, forged anew in the crucible of betrayal and blood. The final confrontation with the enemy's darkest force loomed, a tempest that would test the very soul of the Space Wolves. Ulrich's voice cut through the silence, fierce and resolute. We stand at the edge of oblivion. The wolves will not falter. We strike now or fall forever. Bjorn's ancient voice bore wisdom and warning. The path is shadowed, brother. The Wolf King must guide us through the night. Ragnar's youthful spirit burned bright, tempered by the harsh lessons of loss. For Fenris and the pack, we fight as one, until the last breath. Together, they prepared for the assault on the enemy's fortress, a bastion of corruption and dark sorcery, where the final threads of treachery and rebellion converged. The battle would be brutal, a tempest of fire and steel that could cleanse or doom the pack. As Fenrir's claw plunged into the storm, Russ felt the crushing weight of immortality, the endless cycle of war and loss that bound him to an eternal fate. The Khatan blazed through the battlefield, a streak of frozen death that cleaved through corruption and shadow alike. Amidst the chaos, Russ faced impossible choices, sacrifices that would haunt him beyond the bounds of time. Brothers fell to his command, lives given to secure a fragile hope. The Wolf King's heart was a crucible of pain and resolve, each decision a knife that cut deep. The enemy's dark sorcery writhed and surged, a living nightmare that threatened to consume all. Yet Russ's fury was a beacon, a storm of wrath and unyielding will that pushed back the darkness. In the final moments, the Wolf King confronted the embodiment of betrayal, a being twisted by corruption, once a brother in arms. Their duel was a symphony of fury and sorrow, a clash of immortal wills that echoed through the void. The battle ended with a bitter victory, the enemy broken, but the cost unimaginable. The pack was shattered, their wounds deep and raw. Russ stood amidst the ruin, his gaze heavy with the toll of command. In the aftermath, the Wolf King gathered the survivors, his voice both a lament and a vow. We are the wolves of Fenris, bound by blood, honor, and an unyielding will. Our path is stained with sacrifice, but as long as the wolf's howl echoes in the void, we endure. Ulrich's fierce eyes glimmered with unshed tears. The wolf's vengeance is swift and just. Bjorn's ancient voice carried the weight of ages. We are the pack, eternal and unbroken. Ragnar's youthful cry rang through the chamber. For Fenris and the pack. Yet Russ knew the victory was but a moment's respite. The scars of war and betrayal would never fully heal. Immortality was a lonely burden, and the Wolf King bore it with silent strength. As Fenrir's claw set course once more for the stars, Russ's howl echoed, a haunting promise that the spirit of Fenris would never fade, even as empires crumbled and stars died. The war was far from over, but the Wolf King's resolve burned brighter than ever, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. The dying light of distant suns cast a fragile glow upon the shattered remains of Fenris, a world scarred by endless war and the passage of immortal legacies. The ruins whispered of heroes fallen and empires lost, their echoes lingering like ghosts in the cold wind. Here, at the edge of oblivion, Leman Russ, the Wolf King, stood alone, his figure etched against the twilight of a fading era. The weight of immortality pressed heavily upon him. For millennia, he had borne the burden of endless battle, witnessing the rise and fall of countless civilizations. His Khatan, once a blazing symbol of relentless fury, now hung quietly at his side, its cold edge a mirror to the loneliness that had become his eternal companion. The pack was broken, scattered across the stars, their bonds frayed by betrayal and sacrifice. Russ's heart ached with the loss of brothers, their names etched in memory like sacred hymns. Immortality was a curse that demanded endless vigilance, a path of solitude where the Wolf King hunted not only enemies, but his own fading hope. The final battle had passed, a storm of fire and steel that had cleansed and shattered in equal measure. Victory had come at a price that no song could fully capture. The Wolf King stood amidst the ruin, the echo of his howl a haunting lament for a world forever changed. His thoughts turned inward, reflecting on the choices made, the sacrifices borne, and the heavy cost of power. Betrayal had cut deeper than any blade, and loyalty had been tested in the crucible of war. Russ understood that the true battle was not only against external foes, but the internal demons that threatened to consume the pack from within. The stars above Fenris twinkled coldly, indifferent witnesses to the endless cycle of war and loss. Yet within that cosmic vastness, Russ found a flicker of something enduring, a spark of hope born from sacrifice and resilience. He thought of Fenris itself, wild and untamed, a reflection of the Wolf King's own spirit. Though the Empire had fallen, though brothers had been lost and shadows lingered, the howl of Fenris would never fade. As the sun set on this chapter of his immortal life, Leman Russ made a silent vow to endure, to hunt, and to protect the legacy of his pack. For as long as he drew breath, the spirit of Fenris would burn bright, a beacon against the gathering darkness. The Wolf King turned from the dying light, his figure fading into the shadows of a new dawn. The Empire had fallen, but the legend lived on, in the hearts of those who remembered, and in the eternal howl that echoed across the stars.